Just 1 year after New Orleans found itself gripped by fears of a vampire stalking its streets, another American town, this time small, rural, and far removed from urban chaos, would face its own unexplainable visitor. When people hear about a fantastical cryptid sighting, they assume it was a dubious one-off encounter, misinterpreted shadows, stories from the town drunk, or over-imaginative prankster kids, if they even believe any of it at all. But none of that applies to what happened in Van Meter, Iowa in the fall of 1903. This was not a single witness or a fleeting moment, and it did not involve people seeking attention. Instead, for 5 consecutive nights beginning on September 29, 1903, something so strange appeared that even the most respected members of the community felt compelled to speak up despite knowing how it would sound. At the time of the Van Meter visitor sightings in the fall of 1903, Van Meter, Iowa was a small but growing railroad town shaped by agriculture, the Des Moines River, and steady movement of the Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad. With only a few hundred residents, the town balanced connection to the world with deep rural isolation. Late September marked harvest season, when the days shortened and farm labor dictated daily life. Once the sun set, temperatures dropped quickly, and by midnight, the air was cool and damp, heavy with the scent of freshly cut fields and turned earth. Van Meter had no modern streetlights at the time, and while a handful of buildings were beginning to experiment with electric power, most homes relied on oil lamps or gaslight. After dark, especially in the hours past midnight, the town would have been in near total darkness. Law enforcement consisted of a town marshal rather than a formal police force, and neighbors depended on one another for safety and information. In a place where nights were genuinely dark, scientific explanations were limited, and newspapers blended fact with sensationalism, something unfamiliar moving through the shadows along the river or rooftops was not easily dismissed. It was an environment primed for fear, rumor, and the rapid transformation of the unexplained into legend. It was under these conditions, quiet, rural, and deeply dark, that the Van Meter visitor arrived. The first night began on September 29th, shortly after 1 a.m. Local farm implement dealer U.G. Griffith was returning to Van Meter from a job out of town. As he entered the downtown area, something immediately caught his attention. Perched on the roof of a nearby building was a dark figure, large enough that it did not blend into the shadows. What drew Griffith's eye, however, was a beam of light sweeping slowly across the street below. Witnesses would later describe it resembling a powerful spotlight. Griffith assumed he was witnessing a burglary in progress. This was a small town, and people were accustomed to taking responsibility for their community. He approached to get a closer look. And that's when the figure moved. Without hesitation or apparent effort, the shape leapt from one rooftop to another across the street. There was no stumble, no scramble for footing, just a single, silent jump. And then it vanished into the darkness. At that time, Griffith did not describe this as a monster. He had believed he interrupted criminal activity, but that explanation would not survive the nights to come. The next evening, once again around 1 a.m., the town's physician, Dr. Fred Alcott, was startled awake by an intense light shining through his bedroom window. Considering the season, windows would have been shut tightly against the cool night air. The intrusion of light was impossible to ignore. Dr. Alcott rushed outside, and this time witnesses would get a far clearer description of what the town was dealing with. According to accounts given by Dr. Alcott and others who gathered, the creature stood between 8 and 9 feet tall. It appeared half human and half animal in form. Folded against its body were enormous, smooth, leathery wings. Its face was described as bird-like, with a pronounced beak. Most unsettling of all was a blunt horn protruding from the creature's forehead, and from this horn came the blinding light. As word spread and more residents emerged from their homes, some armed themselves and fired at the creature. Witnesses insisted the bullet struck their target, yet the creature showed no signs of injury. Instead, it took flight, lifting itself into the air and disappearing once more into the night. What had begun as a strange rooftop sighting was now something far more alarming. Over the next several nights, the sightings continued. The creature appeared in different parts of town, and it was seen by different people. The time remained roughly the same, just after midnight when the town was at its quietest. Each appearance reinforced the same details: the wings, the size, the light, and the apparent immunity to gunfire. Fear spread quickly. Parents kept their children indoors, armed men patrolled the streets at night, and people avoided being alone after dark. In a town where neighbors knew one another well, anxiety became a shared experience. And perhaps most importantly, the witnesses continued to come forward. One of the most compelling aspects of the Van Meter case is who those witnesses were. They were not anonymous figures. They were not known exaggerators. They were merchants, a physician, and eventually the town's bank manager, all people whose reputations mattered. Several later accounts emphasize that these individuals did not seek publicity. In fact, they reportedly resented the attention the story brought. In a small farming town, becoming the subject of ridicule could carry lasting social consequences. Yet, the reports continued. By the fourth night, the town no longer treated the creature as a curiosity. It was considered a threat. It's also critical to understand the world these reports came from. In 1903, there was no internet. There were no message boards, no social media, no viral hoaxes spreading in minutes for attention or profit. Information moved slowly, carried by word of mouth and printed newspapers that required time, labor, and editorial oversight. And while newspapers of the era could be sensational, inventing and sustaining a coordinated false narrative across multiple nights reported by identifiable respected townspeople would have required deliberate effort and risked serious social consequences. These were not anonymous posts or fleeting online claims. These were statements tied to real names, real livelihoods, and very real reputations. Whatever the Van Meter visitor ultimately was, the accounts themselves were not casual fabrications. They represent a community attempting to document and describe something it did not yet have the language or framework to explain. By the fifth night, patience had worn thin. A heavily armed group formed with the explicit goal of confronting the creature directly. Based on the pattern of sightings and speculations among residents, they believed the entity had taken refuge in an abandoned coal mine on the outskirts of town. Coal mines in the early 20th century were already places of deep unease. They were cold, damp, unstable, and associated with injury and death. Even in early fall, the temperature inside remained frigid, and darkness was complete. When the men reached the mine, they claimed to see the creature at the entrance, and gunfire erupted. According to newspaper reports, the creature retreated deeper into the mine, appearing wounded at last. Determined to end the threat permanently, the men sealed the entrance using dynamite, and after that night, the sightings stopped. The Van Meter visitor was never seen again. Local newspapers covered the events with language that feels striking even today. One article famously referred to the creature as an antediluvian monster, a term suggesting something ancient, prehistoric, and out of time. This choice of words reflects the cultural movement. The early 1900s were a period of fascination with deep time, evolution, and ancient life. Dinosaurs had only recently entered the public imagination through museum displays and illustrated newspapers. Scientific discoveries were reshaping how people understood the age of the Earth. The idea that something ancient might still exist, hidden beneath the ground, did not feel entirely impossible. And as with any enduring mystery, skeptics have proposed a number of explanations over the years. Some suggest the creature was a misidentified owl or sandhill crane, distorted by darkness, fear, and repetition. Others propose an elaborate hoax, though sustaining one over 5 nights with multiple credible witnesses strains believability. Another theory involves bioluminescent gases escaping from the mine combined with misperceived wildlife. While this could potentially explain unusual light phenomena, it does little to account for the creature's reported size, shape, or apparent resistance to gunfire. No single explanation neatly accounts for all reported details. From a folklore standpoint, the Van Meter visitor fits into a much larger pattern. These stories often emerge during periods of transition and uncertainty. In 1903, rural America was navigating rapid industrialization, scientific upheaval, and shifting worldviews. Traditional explanations were being challenged, but new ones were not yet fully trusted. Monsters tend to appear at boundaries: mines, forests, rooftops, and edges of towns. They occupy spaces between known and unknown, safe and dangerous, past and present. Whether literal or symbolic, the Van Meter visitor reflects a community grappling with forces it could not fully understand or control. More than a century later, the Van Meter visitor remains unsolved. No body was recovered, no definitive explanation accepted, only eyewitness accounts, newspaper clippings, and a story passed down through generations. Today, Van Meter embraces its place in folklore, even hosting a festival celebrating the legend. What once caused fear has become part of the town's identity. But that doesn't erase what happened in 1903. Whether the visitor was a misidentified animal, a product of collective fear, or something far stranger, it left a permanent mark on the town and on American folklore. So the next time someone dismisses cryptid stories outright, remember this: not all unsettling tales are whispered by drunks or pranksters. They're told by doctors, bankers, and townspeople who wished none of this had ever even happened. The Van Meter visitor reminds us that folklore doesn't always arrive as a monster. Sometimes the uncanny enters a community quietly through influence, belief, and stories that linger long after a figure is gone. In our next episode, we leave rural Iowa and turn toward a man whose legacy reshaped an entire region: a Russian prince, a Catholic intellectual, and a life that blurred the line between history, devotion, and myth. Prince Galitzin didn't haunt towns, he transformed them. And yet, even saints leave shadows. Until then, stay curious, stay spooky, and I'll see you in the next strange story.